So now we move to a new area, which is the historical development of welfare state. The welfare state was formed for the first time across the world in the United Kingdom or in the British Isles. Of course, there is the concept of welfare state is old, and we have this, during even the Holy Prophet times and during the Khilafat-e-Rashida, there were some elements of welfare states were there in the Riyasat-e-Medina, you can argue. But in the modern times, the welfare state was established for the first time in Britain, and that's why we are looking at the start or initiation of welfare state in Britain. And in this area, we will look at the historical development, how it started, how poor laws and health-related laws and education laws and all these policies we will discuss there. So in the current module, we will discuss the poor law reform, which was the first social policy in Britain. First intervention, state intervention in social areas was poor laws. So a little bit of history of Britain. Britain was an absolute monarchy until the 18th century, with very few constraints on the monarchs. In the early 18th century, there was Queen Anne didn't have an heir, and most of her near relatives were Catholics. So the British elites, decided to import an emperor or a ruler or a king. So they invited the king of the German state of Hanover to come and become the king of Britain. And of course, in 1714, George I became the king, but he didn't know English. So the policy or the power of monarchy was shifted a little bit to the House of Commons, to the Parliament, and gradually the post of Prime Minister came up. And we can argue that Robert Walpole was the first Prime Minister of Britain. So, poor laws. So, poor laws first are old. They were first passed in the early 17th century, in 1601 and even in 1598. And they were mainly related to, focused on religious poverty and religion. So, poor were made the responsibility of the parish or the church, local church, and government provides some subsidy, but it was usually the church which was. And of course, in England, church is the state church. So Anglican church is provided money to operate its churches and cathedrals by the state. So in a way, when the responsibility was given to the church, it was assumed by the state. Later on, parish model was modified, and then there was a wage subsidy. So even the poor who were working, they were given a loaf of bread or something, so they can manage their own needs, wants, and the needs of their families. Urbanization and industrialization led to concern about poor. So as more and more poor came to live in urban areas, there was more industrialization. There was more concern about poverty. And poverty was, in a way, related to the cause. So most of the people in parliament were landlords, and they were thinking that the industrialists are not paying their workers much, or at least adequately, because the state is paying the poor. State is helping the poor. So they wanted to reduce the expenditure on poverty, even when it was, minuscule as compared to the whole expenditure of Britain. So, and their second concern was that many undeserved poor are actually taking the benefits given by the state. So there were two concerns. They were concerned about undeserved poor, and then there was the concern about the industrialists. giving less wages because they know that state is going to give money to the poor to defray their needs. So the turning point in case of poor laws was 1834, and it really degraded and stigmatized poverty. Poor were forced to have eligibility tests, meaning thereby that if any poor wants to get help from the state, he or she has to join the workhouse, which was a really brutally administered establishment where families were separated, children were separated from mothers, husbands were separated from fathers, and they were given meager meals. They were not given any time for leisure, and so the whole idea was to make them pay for their poverty and to cure their laziness and build character. And one of the examples of that workhouses, which you may have read about, is Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist, when the little boy goes for a second and asks, "Please, sir, I want some more." And the administrator of the poor house is shocked because he has never heard this before, that somebody has asked him for a second meal. Gradually, however, the poverty laws or poor laws are getting better. They are getting less brutal. They got less brutal. There were old age pensions. There was national insurance and health acts. And eventually, the workhouses were abolished in 1929. Thank you.